Good morning and welcome to Kuhn Presbyterian Church on this windy Sunday morning. I got that wind blown up. Our announcements today for next week, we have session meeting after worship, and then we're going to have a service for Ash Wednesday, and that will be held on February 22nd at 6:30. Does anybody else have any announcements? Well, will you please rise for the call to worship? How good is it to sing praises to our God?
For God is gracious, and a song of praise is fitting.
God heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds.
God is our Lord, and abundant in power. God's understanding is beyond measure.
Would you turn your hymnal to 744? Arise, your light is come.
God does not grow faint or grow weary, but comes to us to renew our strength and restore us to right relationship with God and others. Please join me in the prayer. O God, our Creator, Redeemer, and Sustainer, we confess our feelings of anxiety and uncertainty brought on by a continuing pandemic, extreme weather events, acts of senseless violence, and other threats. We look for help, but sometimes it seems you are far away. Remind us that you are present to us and to all your vulnerable children, to comfort and to bless in times of suffering and need. Renew our strength and restore our joy, that we might mount up with wings like eagles to carry out each day's purpose. Amen. stars and the moon, has come close to each of us with mercy and love. Hear the good news of the gospel. We are forgiven and free to run and not be weary, to walk and not faint. Know you are forgiven and be at peace. Amen. Seeing no young disciples here today, we'll move on to our scripture lessons from the prophet Isaiah, continuing with that theme that we started in the prayer of confession. Shout it aloud, do not hold back. Raise your voice like a trumpet. Declare to my people their rebellion, and to the descendants of Jacob their sins. For day after day they seek me out. They seem eager to know my ways, as if they were a nation that does what is right and has not forsaken the commands of its God. They ask me for just decisions and seem eager for God to come near them. Why have we fasted, they say, and you have not seen it? Why have we humbled ourselves and you have not noticed? Yet on the day of your fasting, you do as you please and exploit all your workers. Your fasting ends in quarreling and strife, and in striking each other with wicked fists. You cannot fast as you do today, and expect your voice to be heard on high. Is this the kind of fast I have chosen? Only a day for people to humble themselves? Is it only for bowing one's head like a reed and for lying in sackcloth and ashes? Is that what you call a fast, a day acceptable to the Lord? Is not this kind of fasting I have chosen? To loose the chains of injustice and untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and break every yoke? Is it not to share your food with the hungry and to provide the poor wanderer with shelter? When you see the naked, to clothe them and not to turn away from your own flesh and blood? Then your light will break forth like the dawn, and your healing will quickly appear. Then your righteousness will go before you, and the glory of the Lord will be your rear guard. Then you will call, and the Lord will answer. You will cry for help, and he will say, Here am I. If you do away with the yoke of oppression, with the pointing finger and malicious talk, and if you spend yourselves in behalf of the hungry and satisfy the needs of the oppressed, then your light will rise in the darkness, and your night will become like the noonday. The Lord will guide you always. He will satisfy your needs in a sun-scorched land and will strengthen your frame. You will be like a well-watered garden, like a spring whose waters never fail. Your people will rebuild the ancient ruins and will raise up the age-old foundations. You will be called repairer of the broken walls, restorer of the streets with dwellings. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. The writer of that text was phenomenal. So many images that we can relate to. Our gospel lesson comes once again from the Gospel of Matthew. This is a continuation of the Sermon on the Mount. You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law and the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen, will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. Therefore, anyone who sets aside one of the least of these commands and teaches others accordingly will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Pray with me. Lord God, we place our lives and our wills before you, asking you to fill us with light and salt, that we might be good disciples and winsome in our daily lives for your sake. Amen. Well, today we continue to explore the Sermon on the Mount according to the Gospel of Matthew that we began last week. Again, the words are beautiful and familiar, and we may know certain phrases by heart. The hazard of that can be that they are so familiar we barely hear them anymore. But sometimes we will hear or experience them in a new way, which adds to our understanding. So that's where I hope to lead us this morning, because I had some unplanned moments of clarity related to this text regarding salt and light this week, and we'll get to that shortly. One of my favorite authors is Ruth Everhart. Ruth is a Presbyterian minister, my age in fact. She's been a minister for about as long as I have too, for about 20 years. She grew up in the Reformed Church, one of our formula of agreement churches. We share pastors in the Midwest. Her father was a pastor too. Ruth went to a church-related college and was a good and happy and successful student until the night a serial rapist broke into the home she shared with several other female students and brutally assaulted them and killed one of them. Ruth wrote a book about her recovery from that experience called Ruined, which was named Book of the Year by Christianity Today. That experience has led her to be an advocate for the rights of women and girls, particularly on issues involving sexual assault and its fallout. To that end, she participated in the Women's March of 2017 in Washington, D.C., and she wrote a reflection of that day, some of which I'd like to share with you. During an election cycle, we citizens become familiar with stump speeches. These are the points that candidates repeat at every campaign stop. If the speakers are particularly adept, the refrains they use will echo, even after they have moved on to the next stop. Indeed, certain phrases become associated with a particular face and voice and agenda, so that even fragments of the speech will call to mind the candidate's entire platform. She's taking an artistic leap here. Hang on. The Sermon on the Mount is Jesus' stump speech to me, and the Beatitudes are 9 refrains that echo long after Jesus has moved on. Picture, if you will, the blessed are statements on placards, borne aloft in the sea of faces around Jesus. These fragments form the context about salt and light which seem simple enough to be campaign slogans, but are followed up with the confounding exhortation about righteousness. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. This is the gospel according to Jesus. Righteousness and blessing are the bookends to the salt and light passage. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. He doesn't say you will be the salt of the earth or you will be the light of the world. You are now and here salt and light. Just who is it that Jesus is addressing? Who is the salt of the earth? We say that about others when we meet them sometimes. What we mean are, what Jesus meant, were those who were humble, those who mourn, those who are meek, and those who thirst after doing what is right. Salt of the earth. Salt creates thirst, does it not? The righteous are blessed to thirst after doing what is right. They are salty, and so they thirst. And who is it that Jesus is calling the light of the world? Those who are merciful, those who are pure in heart, those who are peacemakers, and those who receive abuse for standing up for what is right. Righteousness is a form of light, right? The righteous are blessed to show forth purity and peace as they stand up for what is right. They shed light through their actions. Ruth Everhart penned those words in 2017, but they are still relevant, I think. She continues, stump speeches may seem a sour topic right now, a far cry from the gospel and its good news. Our nation is, or was, in the midst of a particularly contentious political season, one shedding more heat than light. You might even say we're embroiled in this season. Perhaps the word embroiled tickles my fancy because something embroiled begs for seasoning. It begs for salt. And surely it makes us thirsty to do what is right. Perhaps the most difficult part of this passage is that it cycles us back to righteousness, which we understand in the abstract, but struggle with in the particulars. Ruth says, any disciple worth his or her salt knows that righteousness is the goal. It forms our telos, the Greek word telos, that thing that we drive toward, our purpose. But how will keeping the Pharisaic law drive us toward righteousness? Jesus does not elaborate. But the answer must be found in salt and light, those elemental things that are so multifaceted. Even though they are simple, there is nothing innocuous about either element. Salt preserves, salt flavors, salt bleaches, but salt can also sting and burn and abrade. Light dispels darkness, light sheds illumination, but light can also blind, either temporarily or permanently. Christians want to be salt and light, but we struggle to know how and when and to what extent. Take, for example, the recent political theater which brought on marches, the Women's March in Washington, sister marches around the country, and indeed the globe. Remember what her emphasis is in ministry, to advocate for women and girls. So for some marchers, this is a way to be, salt and light, while for others, the marchers were nothing but abrasive. So, should we spend more time talking about being salt and light, or more time marching and clarifying the message we are trying to convey? Which is easier for our churches to do? Which is more direct response to the times we find ourselves in? Was there a cause in which Jesus would have marched? Would Jesus have blessed the marchers? And let's think metaphorically about marches and marching. It could be a protest or an intervention of some other type. The important part is to be moved to action, to be more like Christ every day. How does the gospel improve the flavor of our life together? As followers of Jesus, as congregations, as a nation? Ask yourself this: what if we weren't afraid of the sting of salt? What if we spent less time arguing about the design of our lampstands, as really so much Christian talk amounts to, and spent more time shedding light on the darkness that surrounds us? If you intend to be salty, a salty, well-lit disciple, be advised to reread Jesus' speech. The waving placards of "Blessed are" might seem quite inspiring until you realize that Jesus actually means business. This righteousness is not for the faint of heart. What Jesus has in mind might be stinging, blinding righteousness. I mentioned that I heard or experienced this text in a new way recently. I didn't expect it. Most of you are aware that I've been waiting to have cataract surgery. Nancy just asked me about it before we began. It was scheduled, then canceled because the doctor got sick. It's back on the calendar now, not in January, but April. Anyway, because so much time has lapsed between evaluations, I had to go through that process again last week and turn it all over to the insurance to be approved. For such an exam, the doctor requires his patients to go without makeup for 48 hours. I've talked about this before. I'm vain. I don't like this rule. So, after my eyes had been dilated and examined and dates set for surgery, this was Friday, I went out into the morning sunlight. It was not a particularly bright day, but I could barely open my eyes, and I was wearing sunglasses. Nevertheless, this was so foolish. Because I had to run some errands before going home, I pulled out my makeup bag and applied some eyeliner and mascara to make myself more presentable. Or I tried to, anyway. Like I said, I could barely see when I took off my sunglasses. Well, I ran those errands and I made it home a couple of hours later. When I walked into the bathroom, the face looking back at me from the mirror looked like someone had applied magic marker to my eyes. Then I had fallen asleep with my face in a pillow. Pretty frightful. Light can be enormously revealing. It can be blinding. Light isn't always pretty in what it reveals. In fact, light can reveal a world of pain and injustice. But the only way to overcome what is unsightly, what is disturbing, what is not right, is to throw on the light. And then there is the matter of salt. We bought a new set of knives a while back, and I was using one this week to slice an orange, and I underestimated how much pressure I had to exert. Those knives are very sharp. I sliced my finger as well as the orange, and for 3 days it burned and stung whenever it came into contact with an abrasive substance, usually salt or something acidic like that orange. And again, the only way to avoid the pain was to cover it up to prevent contact with its offenders. And I find I do a lot of that in my life. I avoid those things which abrade, those people which abrade. And that cuts both ways, doesn't it? Something hurts, it's under our skin, maybe even tears us apart. And we need to move, to act, to do something to set it right. Maybe we march or run for office or intervene in an abusive situation. Maybe we go knock on a door and say, I'm sorry for some sin we have committed. We are salt when we're moved to act. Friday night was dark and cold. Puppies need to be walked frequently, cold and dark or rainy or not. So on one of our trips outside, I was shivering and hoping Maeve would make it snappy. I wanted to go back inside. The porch light was on, but it doesn't provide quite enough light. And I've been stumbling around for a month now whenever I walk the dog at night. She apparently can see just fine. But instead of dragging me around the yard like she likes to do, Maeve suddenly plopped herself down on the cold, hard ground and started barking. She was looking up toward the mall, which means she was looking to the northwest and barking her head off at a single star overhead. It wasn't a threatening, this is my yard, go away kind of bark. It was a wanna play kind of bark. Pretty fascinating to see her discover something about the universe in which she lives and moves and has her being. I turned her around so that she would see a whole constellation behind her toward the east, and the moon waxing full. She ignored those efforts and went back to her conversation with that single star, the solitary light that stood out in the inky sky. I practiced yoga for years. One of my favorite moments in a yoga session was at the end of the hour when we would clasp our hands in front of our hearts and lean slightly forward and say, Namaste, which I have understood to be the divine light in me salutes the divine light in you. So, namaste, friends. May you be salt. May you be light. May you live in God's divine light, today and always.